All right, get ready to dive into early Japan.
Emperors, yeah.
Ambitious families,
Oh, yeah.
power struggles, a culture blossoming from ancient myths and influences from their neighbors.
That's all there.
We've got a ton of sources for this deep dive.
We do.
Legal codes like the Ritsuryo system,
Mm-hmm.
historical chronicles like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, even some poetry.
Each one gives us a little peek into how Japan went from these mythical origins to a complex empire.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how these sources, each with a totally different perspective, come together to paint this like vivid picture of the past.
It really is. It's like putting together a puzzle,
Right.
a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Exactly.
But instead of some flat image, we're rebuilding a living, breathing period of history.
And every single piece, from like the legal stuff to the poetry, it just adds a whole other layer to the story.
For sure.
One of the things that really struck me was how Japan went from this world steeped in mythology to a more structured like system of law.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. The 7th century, that's when everything changed, when they adopted the Chinese Ritsuryo system.
Okay.
Now, this Ritsuryo system, it was a big deal.
I bet.
It was like this really sophisticated model for running a country. It had everything from how you structure your government to criminal law, the works.
Looks like Japan imported a whole operating system for running their country.
Exactly. And it shows just how much influence the Tang dynasty had back then.
Wow.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
They didn't just copy and paste.
Interesting.
Japan took this system and made it their own, they adapted it to fit their own culture and their own political landscape.
I see.
And the Taiho Code of 702, Japan's first big, all-encompassing legal system.
Yeah.
Total embodiment of this.
How so?
It's got those Chinese influences, sure, but it also incorporates things that are uniquely Japanese.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it shows this desire to balance things out.
Right.
Like, we want something that works, but we also want to hold on to who we are.
Makes sense. Why reinvent the wheel when you can borrow the blueprint, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like Japan was also busy crafting its own story of power, especially when we look at texts like the Kojiki.
Oh, absolutely. The Kojiki, presented to the court in 712, that's a fascinating one. It's like they took mythology and genealogy and blended them together to legitimize the emperor's rule.
Interesting. How so?
It tells the story of how Japan came to be, and it traces the emperor's family line all the way back to the sun goddess Amaterasu.
Wow.
And this whole divine ancestry thing, it wasn't just symbolic, it was central to this idea of Tenka.
Tenka, that's all under heaven, right? I've come across that term before. What does it actually tell us about how early Japanese rulers saw themselves and their place in the world?
So Tenka wasn't just about like looking at a map and saying, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. It was about this authority that they believed came directly from the gods.
Wow.
The Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, another historical chronicle put together around the same time, they both really hammered home this idea of the emperor as a descendant of gods chosen to rule over everything.
So imagine the weight of that. To be told that you're not just a ruler, but practically a demigod.
Right. Talk about pressure.
No pressure. But with this divine mandate to rule Tenka, things must have gotten a little complicated when it came to dealing with neighboring kingdoms.
Oh, sure.
Did everyone just fall in line and accept Japan's dominance?
Not quite.
Really?
While the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki tell a story of everyone peacefully submitting,
Right.
early Japan was actually pretty assertive when it came to establishing its influence.
How so?
They had this tribute system in place,
Oh, good.
demanding offerings and allegiance from the surrounding kingdoms.
So it was like we come in peace, but we're also the chosen ones, so kind of diplomacy.
Precisely. For example, the Nihon Shoki tells of how they conquered kingdoms like Silla and Baekje in Korea. But instead of saying, hey, we won these military victories,
Right.
they spun it as those kingdoms choosing to accept a vassal status within the Tenka system.
That's fascinating. It's like history being rewritten to fit an agenda. It makes you wonder how much of these accounts were meant to be objective historical records versus carefully crafted narratives designed to bolster the emperor's authority.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The way these early texts mix fact, myth, and strategic storytelling gives us a glimpse into how complex power and legitimacy were in early Japan.
It's a good reminder that even when we're dealing with ancient texts, we should always read between the lines. Consider who's telling the story and what their motivations might be.
Absolutely.
But let's switch gears a bit. We've talked about Japan's internal dynamics, but what about their relationship with their powerful neighbor, the Tang dynasty?
Ah, now that's where things get really interesting. You see, Japan during this era, they were very aware of their position right next to a giant like the Tang dynasty. They saw the advancements in Chinese culture, governance, technology.
It's like that feeling when you're the new kid on the block and the cool kids next door have it all figured out.
Exactly. Japan was definitely taking notes from the Tang dynasty. We've talked about the Ritsuryo system, which is a prime example.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there was this tension, this desire to forge their own past. They didn't want to be just another mini-me of the Tang Empire.
So a bit of a we admire you, but we're not your little sibling kind of vibe.
Exactly. And this is where we see leaders like Empress Suiko emerge.
Empress Suiko, now that's a name I want to hear more about. She made some pretty bold moves when it came to dealing with China, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, didn't she refuse a title?
Yeah.
That would have basically made Japan like a vassal state.
Exactly. It was back in 600 CE during some interactions with the Sui dynasty,
Okay.
which, by the way, came before the Tang dynasty.
Right.
Japan was kind of expected to use this title.
Yeah.
That implied they were, like, subservient to the Chinese emperor.
Is see.
But Empress Suiko,
Yeah.
she was clever. She sidestepped that whole thing by using a title that emphasized her own divine lineage.
Oh, sneaky. I like it.
She basically said, nope, not playing by your rules. We've got our own mandate, straight from heaven.
Wow. Talk about a power move.
Right.
So, by emphasizing her divine lineage, she was saying, we're not playing by your rules. We have our own mandate from heaven.
Exactly. It was a bold statement, a declaration of independence. It showed that Japan was ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone on the world stage. And eventually, this all led to Japan taking on the title of Tenno Emperor towards the end of the 7th century.
So Tenno becomes more than just a title. It's a symbol of Japan breaking free from the Tang dynasty's shadow and forging its own path.
Exactly. And this desire to assert their own identity. It popped up in other ways too, especially with Buddhism starting to take root in Japan.
Buddhism. Okay, now this is interesting. So we've got Japan playing this delicate balancing act with China, adopting some things but pushing back on others. And then here comes Buddhism, which came from India, adding a whole other layer of complexity to their cultural mix.
It's a fascinating dynamic. See, while that Ritsurya system we talked about took care of the practical side of governing, Buddhism offered something different,
Yeah.
like a spiritual framework that really clicked with the Japanese people.
And this all happens around the same time that Nara is established as the capital in 710, right?
Right on. The Nara period was a time when Buddhist culture and art really flourished. Think magnificent temples like the Tadaiji Temple, home to that incredible great Buddha statue.
Oh, I've seen that, the Tadaiji Temple. That's one of the most impressive structures I've ever seen. Just standing in front of that massive bronze Buddha statue, you can't help but feel awestruck.
It's true, isn't it? And that feeling of awe, it wasn't an accident.
You're saying it was by design?
Totally.
Yeah.
Those grand temples, the Tadaiji, the whole network of provincial temples called Kokubunji,
Yeah.
they weren't just places of worship, they were also powerful symbols, showing everyone the emperor's authority and his connection to the divine.
So it wasn't just about people finding enlightenment. It was also about solidifying power here on Earth.
Absolutely. You've got these grand temples, right? Filled with intricate artwork, these towering statues.
Yeah.
It took a ton of wealth and resources to build all that. They were like giant billboards, basically, showcasing the emperor's power and his link to the heavens.
It's like that story in the Shoku Nihongi about them finding gold while they were building the Tadaiji Temple. Finding a huge gold mine when you're putting up a temple dedicated to the Buddha. Talk about good timing.
That's such a perfect example of how something that seems random can get woven into a story to make those in power look even stronger. They didn't just see finding gold as plain old good luck. No way.
What did they see it as?
It was a divine blessing. A sign that the emperor was on the right track with these big, ambitious projects, and the heavens approved.
It's like the universe was saying, keep up the good work, here's a little something to help you along.
Right.
But with all this talk of emperors and temples and blessings from above, there's a new power starting to make moves. The Fujiwara clan.
Ah, yes. And this is where we start to see the game of power and influence get really, really interesting. Because the Fujiwara clan, they were different from those warrior clans who were all about fighting for control.
So they weren't interested in brute force.
Not as much. They understood that real power, lasting power, often came from working behind the scenes, from knowing how to manipulate situations and forge alliances.
So less about conquering and more about strategy and playing the long game.
That's it exactly. They were masters of courtly intrigue, and they used that to their advantage. They secured important positions in the government, and most importantly,
What did they do?
they made sure to create strong marriage ties with the imperial family.
Ah, the old keep your friends close and your potential heirs even closer approach.
You got it. And let me tell you, it worked like a charm. In fact, one of their most prominent figures, Fujiwara no Yoshifusa,
Okay.
he became the first regent from the clan.
So he was basically calling the shots.
Essentially, yes, he was ruling on behalf of the child emperor.
Wow. Talk about climbing the ladder. They went from operating in the shadows to practically running the entire empire. That's some next level power play right there.
No doubt about it. And you know those courtly diaries we mentioned earlier? Well, one of the most striking examples of the Fujiwara clan's power comes from the diary of a man named Fujiwara no Mikinaga.
So what did this Mikinaga guy write about? Was he bragging about his political skills? Did he spill the secrets of the Fujiwara clan's success?
Well, he didn't exactly leave a step-by-step guide for aspiring political masterminds.
Too bad.
But he did give us a pretty revealing look into how the Fujiwara clan saw themselves when they were at the peak of their power.
What did he say?
Get this, he wrote, "As I think about it, I am filled with contentment. What is there in the world that I lack?"
Wow. Talk about confidence. Or maybe just a smidge of arrogance.
Maybe a bit of both.
He basically declared himself the ruler of everything. I mean, it's no wonder the Fujiwara clan became synonymous with power during this period.
You can't argue with their success. And their influence, it didn't fade away. In fact, it continued, even as the capital moved from Nara to Heian, what we know today as Kyoto in 794.
The move to Heian, that feels like a whole new chapter in the story of early Japan.
Yeah.
Why'd they decide to pack up and move the capital? Were they just ready for a change of scenery? Or was there something more going on?
While a change of pace is always nice,
Sure.
the move to Heian was driven by a whole bunch of things. It was pretty complex.
Okay.
Some historians think it was a strategic move by the emperor
Really? To what end?
to distance himself from the Buddhist institutions in Nara, which were becoming increasingly influential.
Ah, so even emperors had to worry about a little power struggle now and then? It seems like those Buddhist institutions had become a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, they definitely have.
Yeah.
Remember those impressive temples and all that wealth they symbolized?
Yeah.
Well, with wealth often comes influence. And it's very possible that the emperor felt like he needed to reassert his authority.
I see.
Put a little space between the throne and the temple.
Probably a smart move, especially with the Fujiwara clan waiting in the wings, ready to grab any opportunity to tip the balance of power in their favor. It makes you realize that even in ancient Japan, with all its talk of emperors and divine mandates, the game of politics was just as real as it is today.
Absolutely. And as we move into the Heian period, we'll see this intricate dance between imperial ambition, religious institutions, and some seriously cunning political maneuvering continue to shape the future of Japan.
So we've got this new capital city, Heian, a powerful Fujiwara clan working behind the scenes, and emperors claiming divine authority. What happens next in this story? It feels like we're on the edge of some major changes.
You're definitely picking up on those shifting tides. The Heian period is known for its elegance and all those cultural achievements. But out in the provinces, a different kind of power was gaining ground. The power of the warrior.
The samurai, right. I was wondering when they'd make their grand entrance. We've touched on them a bit, but I'm ready to hear about these legendary warriors, their code of honor, those epic battles.
I don't blame you. The samurai are endlessly fascinating. But before we get lost in stories of sword fights and bravery on the battlefield, it's important to understand how they rose to power.
Okay, so back it up a bit.
Right, remember, Japan wasn't always this unified nation. For ages, it was powerful clans, each with their own armies, fighting for control.
So those early conflicts weren't just about taking territory, they were about consolidating power, figuring out who would rule over the land of the rising sun.
Exactly. And that's where the seeds of the samurai spirit were planted. This emphasis on loyalty to your clan, on being a skilled warrior, on living by a strict code of honor. They weren't just fighters, they were becoming something more, the backbone of a new social order.
It sounds like while the Fujiwara clan was busy playing politics in the court, they might have underestimated these warrior clans out in the provinces, their growing power, their ambition. Was there a turning point where things shifted?
The late Heian period, around the 12th century, that's when things really changed. These warrior clans, particularly the Taira and the Minamoto,
Okay.
they became major players in the game of court politics. They weren't content just being protectors anymore. They wanted a real say in how things were run, maybe even to be the ones calling the shots.
The Tara and Minamoto, two powerful clans, each believing they were the rightful rulers, locked in this epic struggle for control. It's the stuff of legends.
Absolutely. The Jinpei War, as it's known, lasted for years, from 1180 to 1185. Brutal battles, shifting alliances, it had it all.
It's incredible to think that those battles, all that ambition, actually paved the way for a whole new era in Japanese history.
Without a doubt. In 1185, after a decisive victory at the Battle of Dan Nohura, Minamoto no Yoritomo emerged as a victor. And he wasted no time establishing the Kamakura shogunate, which marked the start of, well, the age of the shogun.
The shogunate. So that's when we see the shift from an emperor-led government to like a more military-based rule. The emperor is still around, but the real power is in the shogun's
Yeah,
hands.
that's the gist of it. The emperor became more of a symbolic figure, representing spiritual authority and tradition. But it was the shogun who held the reins of political and military might. And the samurai who once served local lords, they rose to become the ruling class, with their code of Bushido shaping the values of the entire nation.
It's like this massive upheaval, a complete transformation of the power structure, as if the soul of Japan itself was reforged in those epic battles.
It's a powerful image, and it really captures the magnitude of this change. The rise of the shogunate, it wasn't just a changing of the guard, it was a seismic shift in Japanese politics, society, even their culture.
It's amazing to see how everything is connected. From those early myths and powerful emperors to clever courtiers and legendary samurai, each era builds on the one before it. What a journey through early Japanese history this has been.
It's been a pleasure exploring these incredible events with you. As we look back to these pivotal moments, it's clear that history isn't just about memorizing names, dates, and battles. It's about understanding the forces that shape civilizations, the choices people made, the legacies that still resonate with us today.
We've only just scratched the surface of early Japan. I have a feeling our listeners are eager to learn more about these warrior clans, the code of Bushido, and the whole age of the samurai.
And that's the beauty of history. It's a journey that never really ends. There are always new things to discover, more to learn, more connections to uncover.
So, to everyone listening, keep exploring. Dive deeper into the stories that pique your interest. Never stop asking questions about the past. You never know what you might find. Until next time, keep those thinking caps on and happy exploring.